a safe that's untouchable like Elliot Ness. The track hits your eardrum like a slug to your chest. Back a vest for your Jimmy in the city.
What's up, everybody? Ryan Thomas, live on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Another Wednesday edition of the show. Today, what date is it today? July 10th. My Lord. This year is going by fast, to say the least. July 10th. You're tuning into the Thomas Take Sports Podcast right now on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on Spreaker, on Stitcher, every major platform that you could think of, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. This podcast is everywhere now. You can access it any which way you want. Google Podcasts. You can find it on there as well. You can follow me on Twitter, at Ryan Thomas Take, for my take on all things sports, NFL, Major League Baseball, National Hockey League, MMA, boxing, scores, round by round, reactions, anything you can think of, you name it, I'm posting it. But really where my bread and butter is right here, right now, on the podcast, behind the mic, ready to dive into the subject matter of the day. The California Kid, Urijah Faber, comes back. The California Kid's comeback as Urijah Faber will step into the Octagon, the UFC Octagon, for the first time in 2 years as he takes on Ricky Simone, a 15-1 up-and-comer. Touched on this when it was announced, and it feels like it was only yesterday that this was announced. Really, it was a couple months ago. But I touched on this very briefly in another podcast episode talking about the career of Urijah Faber and all that fun stuff. But I want to touch on it again because I feel like it's a little bit different now. And as we inch closer, I've honestly had more thoughts on this topic than I did when the news originally broke. Urijah Faber, simply put, is a legend in this sport. There's only a select few guys that you could say are your Mount Rushmore of MMA. And for me, I got a lot of guys that I rank as, those Mount Rushmore guys. Chuck Liddell, Randy Couture, George St. Pierre, BJ Penn. Urijah Faber's on that list as well. For Mount Rushmore, I believe that you have to have a group of guys that, without those guys, the sport would not be what it is today. And you only got 4 faces on that Mount Rushmore, with Washington, Jefferson, the original Mount Rushmore. The Mount Rushmore with Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt, and Lincoln, if I'm not mistaken. You only got 4 faces, but I think Urijah Faber does belong on the Mount Rushmore of MMA. George St. Pierre is my greatest of all time, so I think he belongs. Chuck Liddell, Randy Couture. Maybe we go with those 4 guys. Liddell, Couture, GSP, and Faber. Because without Urijah Faber, I don't think we'd have these lightweight divisions, 145, 135, and maybe even the women's divisions of 135 and 125 had it not been for Urijah Faber. He really did a lot for those weight classes, and he did a lot actually for women's MMA, bringing in, I should say, women into the sport like Paige Van Zandt, Sarah McMahon. Those were 2 big names for a long time in those divisions. So Urijah Faber is a legend, and I think that anyone that says otherwise would be sorely mistaken. And when I first heard the news of this comeback, though, despite the respect that I will give Urijah Faber, who obviously, as I just said, should be widely regarded as one of the sport's premier pioneers, he established true legitimacy to those lighter weight divisions. And for that, he was recognized and enshrined in the UFC Hall of Fame as a part of the quote-unquote modern era wing, which was just added 2 fighters to that wing within the UFC Hall of Fame with Rashad Evans and Michael Bisping. And for as much love as I have for Michael Bisping and for as much love as I have for Rashad Evans, I feel like Urijah Faber's contribution to the sport did surpass those two guys, just due to the fact that he brought about new divisions within the sport that the sport will never be without. Maybe the men's flyweight division, only time will tell on that, but that's something that only time will tell. But when I first heard that Urijah Faber was going to come back, for all those positive things I just said, when I first heard that Urijah Faber was going to be coming back, I thought, I really don't know. You know, he walked out of that Octagon 2 years ago with a win over Brad Pickett, who was a hell of a fighter in that same era, in that WEC heyday era that Urijah Faber was the king of. And I thought that was a good win in Sacramento on his home soil. But time can change a lot. And it wasn't as if Urijah Faber walked out of the sport a shell of himself. I don't think that was the case. There was an obvious debate to be made that Urijah Faber could still definitely compete. And this is another facet to Urijah Faber's career that doesn't get talked about enough. The ability for Faber to stay in peak physical condition is unlike anything I've seen. Maybe the exception of truly special, unique specimens. Guys like George St. Pierre, guys like John Jones. Urijah Faber has never had any questions or naysayers talk about his physique or his ability to last within a fight. Urijah Faber's had cardio for days. He's always been in peak physical condition. And you weren't going to worry about Urijah Faber, getting fat like some of these fighters that retire only after a couple years they pop up on the camera again and you're like, wow, who the hell is that? You're not going to have that problem with Urijah Faber. Urijah Faber is still in very, very good physical condition. And I would argue that he might be even in better physical shape due to the fact that he did take those 2 years off and gave his body a chance to recuperate and recalibrate and move forward. And that is what I really liked about the idea of someone retiring for a little bit only to come back. George St. Pierre, as I mentioned, he was retired for 4 years, came back, won the middleweight title off of Michael Bisping. So it can be done. John Jones has had obvious breaks within his schedule for a wide variety of reasons, most of which involve breaking the law. But John Jones did have those breaks within his career, and he was able to come back and be successful. But the matchmaking in this instance is really difficult for me to wrap my head around. Urijah Faber is fighting Ricky Simón, a fighter that is an up-and-comer, a fighter that's very young, a fighter that is looking to break on through. And I find that to be tough. He is the 15th ranked guy in the UFC bantamweight rankings, but as I mentioned, he's looking to get that top 10 win. He's 15-1. He's got 7 finishes out of those 15 wins. 8 are by decision. And he's obviously on a long win streak. He's won his last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 fights and fought in February, defeating Ronnie Yaha. Ronnie Yaha at UFC 234. Fought Montel Jackson, fought Merab Dashvili, Vinicius Zani, Chico Camus, he fought as well, who was a veteran of the sport. So, this guy's really looking to break through, and the best way to break through would be to get a win off of Urijah Faber. He's the biggest name in the lighter weight classes, and this was a huge opportunity for him. Originally, it was reported that Urijah wanted to fight a veteran. He wanted to get in there with maybe a Cub Swanson or somebody like that. But the UFC gave him this opportunity to fight on his home soil, and they gave him the opponent, and he said yes. So a fight's a fight. Urijah's been around a long time. But in terms of the decision to fight a younger fighter on the UFC's part. I'm a little bit curious as to why they did that. Now, this fight is the co-main event of a UFC Fight Night, July 13th, Golden One Center in Sacramento, California. The main event is Jermaine Durandamy versus Aspen Ladd. Winner of that fight might get Amanda Nunes next, so that's something to keep our eyes out on. Josh Emmett's return against Mirza Bektik. Carl Robertson versus Wellington Thurman. Marvin Vettori versus Cesar Ferreira. Vettori is 12-4. Cesar Ferreira, 34 years old, 13-7 in the middleweight division. So Andre Touchy-Feely versus Shimon Moraes. Juliana Pena versus Nico Montano. Darren Elkins versus Ryan Hall. That'll be a fun fight. But only time will tell.